And good to see you this morning. We are going to start a new study, if you will, go kind of a different direction. And hope you're having a good Monday morning. I'm still a little foggy and things like that, kind of overslept myself, but that's okay. And thankful for the Lord waking me up and getting me going. And just want to give you a little start on a different study that I think beneficial to us, and I find a lot of encouragement in this book. And so, if you will, grab Psalm chapter 1 with me. Psalm chapter 1, and we'll kind of start a new study, if you will, into the book of Psalms, and just try to pull some encouragement from it and see what the Lord would. It's been used in funerals. It's been used to comfort those who have lost loved ones. It's also been used to just bring comfort and joy on a daily basis. And I read the Psalms every day and just try to spend some time learning and growing in that. And so, most prominent writer of the Psalms is David. More than 72 of the Psalms are attributed to him. Some others that penned some Psalms, 12 are attributed to Asaph, 12 are attributed to the sons of Korah, and one is by Moses, two by Solomon, one is attributed to Ethan, and then there are over 40 that are unknown. And it is believed that David also penned those, but we don't know for sure. The book of Psalms has 150 chapters. And so just kind of give you an idea of an overview of the book of Psalms before we get going here. And within the book of Psalms, we have the longest chapter of the Bible, and that is Psalm 119, which contains 176 verses. And so some of these Psalms are incredibly personal and very revealing, to where you kind of feel as though you're in that person's life. You're eavesdropping where you might not ought to eavesdrop, and so God just really opens up man's heart. He opens up his own heart, and we really see the raw reality of a Christian life as we follow God, and it helps us in those weak and discouraging times to really reach out and seek God in those ways. And so many of the chapters are really instructions for the proper way of worshiping God. And there's many lessons that we can pull from this book. And so I think it's important to kind of get into it and learn from it a little bit. Jesus himself frequently quotes from Psalms, and there were well over 100 quotations just in the New Testament by various penmen that go back to the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms is also a book that contains many different things. Much prophecy is in the book of Psalms as well. The birth, the crucifixion, the resurrection, as well as the second coming of Christ are all spoken of in the book of Psalms. And so we can look at the book of Psalms and really gravitate towards it and gain a lot of information as we seek to really please the Lord and draw nigh to him. And the Psalms were oftentimes you'll see a little annotation above the first verse and below the title or the psalm number, and it'll say something about music. And so a lot of these psalms are exactly that. It's music, it's lyrics and things like that. And they would often just sing these psalms, and we even have a lot of psalms today that are put to music and that we sing in the churches and what have you. And the Hebrews would sing them in worship services. And, it's interesting because we read in Matthew 26 and in verse 30, and when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. And that is kind of the completion of the Last Supper, going into the Mount of Olives prior to Christ being arrested and then eventually tried and sent to the cross that evening. And so when they're singing a hymn, and it very well could have been a psalm that they sang, and so we know it's important, and it gives us some good truth to get into, that can be seared into our heart as we meditate on it and grow thereby, and something that we can have as encouragement. And many people know and have memorized Psalm 23. And so as that's been read by the graveside many times, it's been mentioned to give comfort and peace to those that are going through hardship and those that have lost people and loved ones and things like that. And so we, have a plethora of access to God in this. And so we're going to start in Psalm chapter 1 today. We're not going to go through the whole chapter or anything like that, but I do kind of want to give you in this 6-verse psalm just kind of a basic function of introduction as we kind of get into this. And so Psalm 1 is really has a theme that is as big as the Bible is, because it's really talking about the people. It's talking of the paths that we choose to go down, and it's talking ultimately of those destinations that we will come upon when we follow these paths. And you can see a significant parallel. I won't go to it for the sake of time, but you can see a significant parallel in Jeremiah chapter 17, verses 5 to 8. And so there's two cycles that come in to Psalm chapter 1 that separates all people into their respective spiritual categories, if you will. And in verses 1 through 4 is through observance. It's really people that are separated ethically. Verses 1 through 3 cover the picture of the godly, while verse 4 covers a picture of the ungodly. And then the second category, if you will, is by outcome. And so it's all those people that are separated judicially. And we find that in verses 5 and 6, with verse 5 showing the failure of the ungodly people. In verse 6, closing out the psalm, going into the fruition of lifestyles, the recognition of God, as well as the ungodly. And so the psalm forms really an appropriate and important introduction, since it really sets before the reader three characteristics that we will see throughout Scripture, and that is the righteous saved, the ungodly lost, and then God Himself. And so look with me, Psalm chapter 1, and we're just going to look at verse 1 today. There's a lot in verse 1, and I don't want to be too long this morning, but Psalm chapter 1 and verse 1 says, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful." And so the first word we find in this psalm, in this verse here, is blessed. Blessed. And that word blessed simply means happy. It's an inward joy that we receive. And it's this same word that we find in the Beatitudes in Matthew chapter 5, verses 3 through 12. And so it's really an exclamation of strong emotion. It's a result from deep reflection on a subject. And the psalmist it really is just painting a picture of the gravitational pull of evil as we try to walk through this life for Christ, and in the counsel of the ungodly is pulling us, and we kind of get wrapped up in it sometimes. And so from the perspective of the individual, this is a deep-seated joy and contentment in God. Okay. And so from the perspective of the believing community, though, it refers more to the redemptive favor that God bestows upon us. And you can kind of see a comparison of this in Deuteronomy chapter 27, and from Deuteronomy 27 verse 11 to Deuteronomy 28 and verse 6. And so Deuteronomy 27 kind of closes out speaking of all of these different curses upon the ungodly. And then you find in 28, as it opens up, a plethora of blessings that begin to come upon the godly. And so we're to walk in that blessing. We're to draw nigh to God so that he draws nigh to us. But understand that it says that the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. And so we need to know what the counsel of the ungodly is. And this is referring to the advice that encourages people to live evil in their lives and without concern for righteousness or obedience to God. Psalm chapter 26 and verse 4 and 5 says, I have not sat with vain persons, neither will I go with dissemblers. I have hated the congregation of evildoers and will not sit with the wicked. And so, we need to understand that there is a place for us, and that God desires for us to walk with him and not with those that are around us and those that are trying to pull us away from God. Satan will use any and everybody in our life to pull us away. And so we need to be very careful with that. Proverbs 4 and verse 14 says, enter not into the path of the wicked and go not in the way of the evil men. And so we need to really be seeking God, be in his word, be growing, that we may have the spiritual discernment to avoid those situations. And so the ungodly move from counsel to walking on a path. And then the next words are that they're going to be seated. They're standing in the midst, and then they're going to be seated. And so there's a process throughout our lives that if we're not careful, we're going to begin embracing a lot of these evil ways. And so the Sermon on the Mount begins with blessings, and we see that the Psalms begins with blessings as well. And so Galatians chapter 2 in verse 20 says, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. And so we need to understand that we're not living a life for ourselves, but we're living a life for Christ as he gave us himself. He gave us that life. He helped us along the way. And so as we stand and we live life, we can't get confused. We can't allow ourselves to be deterred by all of the evil ways in this world. And this is why Paul commends us in Romans not to be conformed to this world. And so we often don't think much about it as we just kind of walk, but then we'll stand and we'll allow them to talk to us, and that takes a little bit more time. And then before long, we're sitting amongst the counsel of the ungodly, and that takes even more time. And that's pulling us away from the fellowship of the believer. It's pulling us away from fellowship with God. It's pulling us away from the duties that we have in order to really live a life for Christ and to be happy and to be blessed. And so if we want that blessing, we need to have that spiritual discernment to abstain from the evilness around us. 2 Corinthians chapter 16, 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 14 commends us to be not unequally yoked together with the unbeliever. And he poses a question. He says, what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with dark? And so as we look at the life of a Christian, as we look at the life of the evil in this world, we really don't get along. We really can't commune together. And this is why Amos in chapter 3 of verse 3, he says, can two walk together except they be agreed? And we need to understand that, yes, we need to be taking the gospel to the unbeliever. We need to be sharing the grace and the truth of God and the mercy and those kind of things. But true happiness comes from fellowship with God and with God's people. It does not come from the world. And what comes from the world is destruction. What comes from the world is chaos. What comes from the world is a misinterpretation of what happiness is. And so I just want to encourage you this morning as we kind of close out this thought from Psalm 1:1 and the challenge that it gives us. Make sure that you're spending time with the Lord, and make sure that you're cultivating godly relationships, that you do not pull away from God, and allow those cultivated relationships to encourage you and to strengthen you in the Lord. Iron sharpeneth iron, so that the man's countenance sharpeneth his friend. And so I'll get it out eventually. And so, just understand that we need to have the right friends, and we need to be in the right place to encounter God. And so there are specific ways God desires for us to worship him. There are specific ways God desires for us to grow in a relationship with him. There are specific things that he wants us to do that we can draw nigh to him. And when we do that, he will draw nigh to us. But if we allow the distractions of this world to pull us away from him, then we're going to reap the consequences thereof. And so gather the blessings, go to Deuteronomy, read those curses and those blessings, choose which one you want. And I don't know about you, but I want to draw nigh to God, and so that I can have the happiness that only comes from him. And so trust in the Lord today, and spend extra time with him, and just dwell in the blessings that he gives you. God bless you. I sure love you, and we're praying for you.